she did everything right. She stayed late. She rebuilt his entire presentation from scratch. 11 slides, corrupt data, a blank title card. All of it, until 12:43 in the morning. She sent it back with a note that said, "Any adjustments? Just let me know." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and went to sleep. The next morning, he stood in front of that room like he had built something, like the work was his, like she was furniture. And then the numbers didn't add up, and the financial director frowned. And Derek Calloway, without hesitation, without shame, turned to the back of the room and said, "The intern put that section together. I was still reviewing." 12 people in that room. 12 people heard it. Not one of them said a word. She was a young Black woman 3 weeks into her first real job, sitting in the back with her dark green notepad, and she held her face completely still while the room turned to look at her. Because she had learned to do that. Because she had been practicing that particular kind of stillness for a very long time. She walked to the bathroom. She locked the door. She let herself cry. Fast, quiet, the kind of tears that have nowhere else to go. What she didn't know was that someone had seen her walk out of that corridor. Someone who moved through that building like the walls belonged to him. Because they did. Someone who wore a dragon tattoo up his neck and hadn't raised his voice in years. Because he didn't need to. A Korean Mafia boss. Standing at the end of the hall. Watching. And what he did next silenced an entire office floor. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths resonate with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. She had learned, early on, that the trick to surviving places like this was to make yourself useful without making yourself visible. Naomi Edwards had been practicing that particular art for exactly 23 days, 3 weeks and 2 days inside the glass towers of Sung Capital Group, 34 floors above a Manhattan that never once looked up at her. She arrived every morning at 8:17. Not 8:15, which would seem eager, not 8:20, which would seem careless. 8:17, which was the invisible number, the number no one remembered. She wore the beige blazer today. She had 3 blazers, beige, charcoal, and a deep burgundy she was saving for a moment that had not yet arrived. The beige one was slightly too large in the shoulders, which she had solved by rolling the sleeves twice, precisely, so that it looked intentional. She had learned to do that too. Make the imperfect look deliberate. Her notepad was green, dark green, the color of something that grows quietly. She had filled 41 pages in 23 days. Not because anyone asked her to take notes, but because writing was the thing she did when she needed her hands to be busy and her face to be still. And there were many moments in that office that required exactly that combination. The thin gold chain around her neck, the one her mother had pressed into her palm the morning of her graduation, the one with the small crescent moon, had become something she touched without realizing. A reflex. She touched it in the elevator. She touched it when someone spoke to her in a tone that was almost condescending, but not quite enough to name. She touched it now, standing at the coffee machine on the 34th floor, listening to Derek Calloway tell a story that 3 people were pretending to find funny. Derek was the kind of man who had been told he was exceptional often enough that he had stopped checking whether it was still true. He was 34 years old and had been at Sung Capital for 6 of them, long enough to mistake familiarity for competence. He had a particular laugh, short, conclusive, that he deployed to mark the end of his own observations, in case anyone had missed that the observation was finished and applause was appropriate. He had sent Naomi the presentation files at 9:47 the previous night. She had been in bed, half reading, when her phone lit up. The message read, "Quick favor. Can you clean these slides up a bit before tomorrow's 10 a.m.? That was how it was framed. A quick favor. A bit of cleanup. She had opened the files. 11 slides. 7 of them were structurally incoherent. 3 contained data that did not correspond to any report she had been given access to. 1 was simply a title card with a gradient background and no content whatsoever. She had worked until 12:43 in the morning. She reformatted every slide. She rebuilt the data projections using the quarterly numbers from the shared drive, cross-referencing 2 separate reports to make the growth figures accurate. She rewrote the executive summary from the beginning. She sent it back with a message. Any adjustments? Just let me know. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji at 1:02 a.m. She had stared at that emoji for a moment, then put her phone face down and gone to sleep. The 10 o'clock meeting began with Derek in front of the room. And Derek was good in front of rooms. She would give him that. He moved well, spoke with the casual confidence of someone who had never once doubted that the room was arranged for his benefit. He clicked through the slides she had rebuilt. He did not say her name once. She sat near the back, notebook open, watching the financial director's face. The financial director was a compact, careful man named Harrison who had a habit of tilting his head slightly when something didn't align. He tilted it now, looking at slide 7, the growth projection, the one she had spent 40 minutes reconstructing from source data. Those numbers, Harrison said, without looking up, don't align with the Q3 report. The room changed temperature. Slightly. The way rooms do. Derek paused. He looked at the slide. He looked at Harrison. And then he turned, not quickly but deliberately, the way a man turns when he has already decided what he is going to say, and looked toward the back of the room. The intern put that section together, he said. I was still reviewing. 12 people in the room. 12 people heard it. Not one of them said anything. Naomi did not look up from her notepad. She wrote something. She could not have told anyone what later. Her hand moved because it needed to move. She felt the attention of the room turn toward her like a physical thing, like a change in air pressure, and she kept her face entirely still because she had practiced this too. The stillness. The way you could be burning and appear to be simply standing. The meeting ended. People gathered laptops and moved toward the door with the specific efficiency of people who wanted to leave before anything else happened. Derek passed her in the hallway, close enough that she could smell his cologne, and said with a small smile, "Next time pay more attention to the numbers, all right?" She said nothing. She walked to the bathroom at the end of the east corridor, the one that was slightly out of the way, the one that was usually empty. She locked the stall door. She pressed her back against it. She let the tears come quickly because she had learned to cry fast. Not the heaving, extended kind of cry, but the sharp, efficient release of something that had no other exit. 3 weeks of swallowing corrections she hadn't caused. 3 weeks of smiling at people who looked through her. 3 weeks of being visible only when there was a mistake to assign. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a breath, checked the mirror. The mascara, which she never wore, had not run. Because she never wore it. Because she had calculated this possibility. She pressed her fingers against the crescent moon pendant once. Then she straightened the beige blazer, picked up the notepad, and walked back out. She did not know that the man standing at the end of the main corridor had seen her emerge from the side hallway. She did not know that he had been standing there for 4 minutes, waiting for an elevator he had already summoned, and then quietly canceled. She did not know what he had seen in the way she walked, the shoulder square, the chin level, the grip on the notepad just slightly too tight. She did not know that he recognized it with the kind of recognition that lives in the body rather than the mind. The recognition of someone who has watched a person carry something invisible and unbearable, and walk forward anyway. Kwon Sung-jin had built his entire life on reading what people did not say. It was, in many ways, the only skill that had ever truly kept him alive. He could read a room in seconds, not the surface of it, but the underneath. The hesitations, the weight behind casual gestures, the specific way a person holds themselves when they are pretending the world has not just done something to them. He watched her walk to her desk. He watched her sit down. He watched her open the dark green notepad and write something, head down. And he knew, with the absolute certainty of a man who had spent decades trusting that particular instinct, that whatever was written in that notepad in that moment was not work. He turned to his assistant, who had been standing 2 steps behind him with the silence of someone very well trained. "Pull the entire marketing team," he said. His voice was the same volume it always was, which was to say barely enough to cross a room. "Conference room A, now." His assistant did not ask why. People who worked for Kwon Sung-jin for more than 3 months stopped asking why. He walked toward the conference room without looking back. The tatuage of the dragon climbed his neck above the open collar, and the overhead lights caught the face of the Patek Philippe once, briefly, as he moved. No one in the office knew exactly what he was, but every single one of them moved faster when he spoke. She had taken the seat closest to the door. It was not a conscious decision, or perhaps it was, in the way that certain instincts become so practiced they no longer announce themselves. Naomi had simply moved toward the chair nearest the exit, the way water moves toward the lowest point of a surface. Quietly, without ceremony. It was the seat that allowed her to see the room while keeping the option of leaving it, and she had been choosing that seat in every room for as long as she could remember. The conference room filled in the particular way rooms fill when no one knows why they have been summoned. People entering with the careful, calibrated energy of individuals who want to appear unconcerned while scanning every available face for information. There were 12 of them. The marketing team, 3 junior analysts, 2 senior managers, and Derek, who entered last among the senior staff with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his collar slightly open, wearing the expression of a man who had decided the best response to uncertainty was the performance of ease. He sat at the middle of the long side of the table. Not the head. He was not the head, but the middle, which was the position of someone who wanted to be seen from every direction, without claiming authority he had not been assigned. He glanced at Naomi once as he settled into his chair. The glance was brief and dismissive, the kind you give to furniture. Naomi wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Then she stopped writing and waited. The door opened without a knock. This was the first thing the room registered, not the man himself, but the absence of the knock. People who knock are asking permission to enter. The door simply opened, and Kwon Sung-jin was standing in it. And then he was walking through it. And then the door closed behind him without anyone having touched it, because his assistant had followed him in and taken the handle silently, and that was the second thing the room registered. That there were 2 people now standing where there had been an open door, and the quality of the air had changed. He did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, not behind the chair, but beside it, which was a distinction that mattered in ways that were difficult to articulate. Standing behind a chair is occupying a position. Standing beside it is choosing not to need one. He looked at the room. He looked at it the way a person looks at a map, not searching for anything specific, but reading the terrain. His eyes moved slowly from face to face with no particular urgency, and the silence extended past the point where someone should have spoken, and then further past that point. And no one filled it because the silence had a quality that discouraged interruption. The dragon tattoo was visible above the open collar of the black suit. The overhead lights gave it a strange depth. The ink was old enough to have settled into the skin completely, so the lines were not sharp the way new tattoos are sharp but integrated, like something that had always been there. Several people in the room had not seen it before. Several people in the room tried not to look at it, which meant they looked at it more than they intended. When he finally spoke, his voice was exactly the volume required to be heard across the table. Not louder. Someone in this room made one of you cry today. The sentence landed in the silence like a stone into still water, and the ripples were visible on every face. No one spoke. No one moved with the reflexive quickness of someone who has nothing to hide. Everyone had something that moved across their expression. Guilt, confusion, the specific discomfort of someone who had witnessed something and said nothing, and was now considering whether silence counted as participation. Derek's face did something complicated. The ease drained from it first, replaced by a brief flash of calculation, replaced then by a reconstruction of ease that was close to the original, but not identical in the way a copy is never identical to the source. I'm not going to investigate, Sungjin continued. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands or request statements in writing. He paused. I'm going to say what I already know, and then I'm going to say what changes because of it. And that will be the entirety of this conversation. He moved, not toward anyone, but along the side of the table, slowly, hands at his sides. The movement was unhurried in a way that made it more rather than less unsettling, because hurried movement has a destination, and destination implies limit. A member of this team submitted work today that was not his own. When that work contained an error that originated in the data he provided, not in the execution, he redirected that error in front of 12 witnesses toward the person he had asked to do the work. And then, in the corridor afterward, he instructed that person to be more careful. He stopped walking. He was standing behind Derek's chair now, not touching it, simply standing behind it. Derek did not turn around. This was, Naomi would think later, the most revealing thing he did in that entire room. The man who had a comment for everything, who had a smile timed for every social occasion, sat completely still and did not turn around. Sir, Derek said, and his voice was controlled, carefully controlled, only slightly higher than his normal register. With respect, I think there may be some miscommunication about what you told her to pay more attention to the numbers. A pause. I heard you, Sungjin said. The quality of the silence in the room changed again. Because there is a difference between being caught by someone who was told and being caught by someone who was there. And everyone in that room understood the difference, and the understanding moved through them visibly. Derek opened his mouth, closed it. A small muscle in his jaw worked once. Was it recorded? He asked. The smile he produced was meant to suggest this was a reasonable, clarifying question, rather than a desperate one, because I want to make sure we're not... It wasn't recorded. Sungjin moved from behind the chair and came around to the side of the table, where he could see Derek's face directly. He looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier. But something more like the patience of a person who has already decided the outcome and is simply allowing the other party to finish arriving at the same conclusion. I was in the corridor. You didn't see me. Across the table, Naomi had stopped breathing in the shallow, managed way she had been breathing since she sat down. Her pen was still. She was looking at the surface of the table in front of her, and her expression was one that no one in the room could have named precisely. It was not relief, not yet, and it was not gratitude, not entirely, because gratitude requires safety, and she had not yet confirmed that she was safe. What she felt, most accurately, was the specific vertigo of watching the ground beneath the structure she had been standing on turn out to be different from what she had been told it was. She had been told, in 100 indirect ways, that this was how offices worked. That credit moved upward and accountability moved downward. And the most important skill was learning to absorb both without making a face about it. She had been told this not with words, no one said it with words, but with every small omission, every absence of correction, every room full of people who had seen exactly what she had seen and chosen to study their hands. And now the most dangerous person in the building was standing at the head of the table, speaking at a volume barely above conversational, and the man who had handed her the error he had made was sitting very still and not turning around. She touched the crescent moon at her collarbone. Once. Sungjin's eyes moved to her, briefly and without expression, or with an expression that was too precise and too quick for anyone else in the room to catch. Something passed across his face that was not nothing. Something that had a name he had not said out loud in years. Then he looked back at the room, at all of them. "Every deliverable produced by this team," he said, "will carry the name of the person who produced it. Every correction will be traced to its origin." He was quiet for a moment. If anyone in this office uses their position to reassign their failures to someone with fewer resources to push back, he did not finish the sentence immediately. He let the space where the consequence should have been remain empty, just long enough for every person in the room to fill it with whatever they feared most. "I will find out," he said finally. "And I have considerably more time than you have imagination." He walked to the door. His assistant opened it before he reached it. He did not look back. The door closed. For a long moment, no one in the conference room spoke or moved. The 12 people who remained sat inside the particular aftermath of something that had happened too quickly and too finally to process in real time. Derek's collar was still open. His sleeves were still rolled, but the casual architecture of the man had collapsed slightly, in the way that structures collapse when the thing holding them together is removed, and everyone can see for the first time that it was never load-bearing. Naomi closed her notepad. She capped her pen. She stood up, pushed the chair back with the same quiet precision with which she did everything, and walked out of the conference room without looking at Derek Calloway once. She did not need to. She had the feeling, just beginning, like the first pressure change before weather, that the ground beneath her was not what she had been told it was, and that someone had known that for longer than she had. She had not been called to his office before. In 23 days, Naomi had passed the corner suite at the end of the executive corridor exactly 7 times. She knew because she had counted without meaning to, the way you count things that represent boundaries you have been taught not to cross. The door was always closed. Sometimes there were voices behind it, low and indistinct, the kind that carry tone without content. Sometimes there was nothing at all, which was in some ways more unnerving than the voices. The message came through his assistant at 3:41 in the afternoon. It was not an email. It was not a calendar invite with a subject line and a list of attendees. It was simply a woman appearing beside Naomi's desk, quietly, as all of Sungjin's people moved quietly, and saying, "Mr. Kwan would like to see you, whenever you're ready." And then leaving, which meant immediately, which everyone in proximity to power learns to translate correctly. Naomi saved the document she was not really working on. She picked up her notepad from instinct, then set it back down, then picked it up again because her hands needed something to do, and the notepad was the thing they had learned to reach for. She walked to the executive corridor. The suite door was open. This, she understood, was deliberate. She stepped inside. The room was larger than she had imagined, and quieter than seemed possible for a building that sat above a city of 8 million people. The far wall was entirely glass, floor to ceiling, Manhattan arranged below it with the indifferent grandeur of something that had always been there and would continue to be there long after everyone in this room had finished mattering. The desk was dark wood and nearly empty. A single open laptop, a phone, a glass of water that had not been touched. 2 chairs in front of the desk. A single lamp casting a warm pool of light that made the rest of the room feel further away. Sung-jin was standing at the window, his back to her, his hands at his sides. "You can sit," he said without turning. "I'm fine standing," she said. "Thank you." A pause. Something in that pause that she could not name. He turned then. He looked at her the way he had looked at the conference room, reading terrain. But different now because the room was smaller and there were only 2 of them in it. And terrain is a different thing when you are standing inside it rather than surveying it from a remove. "You're not in trouble," he said. "I know," she said. She did not entirely know, but she had decided to say it anyway, because there is a kind of confidence that is not the absence of fear, but the decision to occupy the space fear would otherwise claim. He studied her for a moment. The lamplight touched the side of his face and left the other half in shadow, and the dragon tattoo moved slightly when he breathed, which she noticed and then looked away from. "I want you to know," he said, "that what happened today was not your fault. The data error originated in the files he sent you. I had the IT team pull the version history this afternoon." He said this without emphasis, the way you state a fact that does not require decoration. "The correction will be reflected in the record." She absorbed this. She turned it over carefully, the way you handle something that might be fragile or might be a test, and you cannot yet tell which. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her. "Why did you do that?" she said. "You didn't have to. You're the CEO. Derek's error in a marketing presentation isn't..." She stopped, recalibrated. "It isn't something that crosses your desk." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Outside, 34 floors below, the city moved in its perpetual, indifferent rhythm. A siren somewhere, the pressure of wind against glass. "I had a sister," he said. He said it the way a person says something they have decided to say before fully resolving whether they should. Stated, and then allowed to exist in the air between them, and neither retracted nor elaborated upon immediately. Naomi did not speak. She had learned that silence, offered carefully, was the thing that allowed people to continue. "Her name was Sung-yeon," he said. She was 21. She had just started working in a firm in Seoul, finance, not marketing, but the architecture is the same everywhere. He paused. She was good at it. Better than the people above her, which in most environments is an asset, and in some environments is a liability. He turned back toward the window. Not entirely, but enough that he was speaking at an angle. At her and at the glass and at whatever was beyond it simultaneously. For 2 years she absorbed what your offices call culture. The corrections that land on certain people more than others. The credit that moves upward and the accountability that moves down. She was professional. She was patient. She was, he said, and something in his voice changed register almost imperceptibly. Everything they tell you to be. Naomi's hand found the crescent moon at her collarbone without her deciding to move it. She stopped telling me what was happening. He continued. I was in a different city by then. A different world, honestly. She would call on Sundays and say she was fine, and I believed her because she was Sung-yeon, and Sung-yeon was always fine. He was quiet for a moment. She was not fine. She had not been fine for a long time. And I was not paying the kind of attention that would have told me the difference. The lamp hummed almost inaudibly. The city pressed against the glass. She died, he said. At 21. Not from illness. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The shape of the sentence was enough. Naomi felt something move through her chest. Not pity, which would have been the wrong thing, but recognition. The recognition of someone who understood the specific weight of what he was describing, not from the same distance, not from the same angle, but from the same gravity. The way certain forces act on everyone, regardless of where they are standing. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it with a precision that the phrase rarely carried. He turned to face her fully then, and for the first time since she had entered the room, the expression on his face was not the controlled, read-nothing surface she had come to understand as his default. There was something underneath it. Not grief, exactly. Grief that old has usually transformed into something else, something harder and more permanent. But it was there. It was real. "When I saw you in the corridor," he said, "I recognized the way you were walking." She looked at him, the shoulders level, the grip on the notepad. He paused. The specific way a person carries themselves when they have just swallowed something they should not have had to swallow, and are determined not to let anyone see the shape it made going down. The room was very quiet. "I didn't need to be protected," Naomi said. She said it carefully, without edge, because she wanted it to be heard correctly. "I needed to be credited." Something shifted in his expression. The closest thing to a smile she had seen on him. Not a full one, not performed, but real in the way that small involuntary things are real. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." She looked at him for a moment. This man who was, by every account, she had never been given directly, but had assembled from the architecture of how people moved around him, not a safe person in any conventional definition of the word. Who had built something vast and complicated and not entirely visible. Who had walked into a conference room for a reason that had nothing to do with corporate governance, and everything to do with a 21-year-old woman in Seoul who had stopped calling on Sundays. "She would have been your age now," he said. Not to her, exactly. To the room. Naomi did not look away. She held the space of what he had said with the same steadiness she held everything. Not without feeling, but feeling held inside posture. The crescent moon was warm under her fingertip. "I don't know what to say," she said finally. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know why. Not because I need something from it." She nodded slowly. There was a quality to this man, she thought, that she had not encountered before and did not have clean language for. He was not good. She did not think she was meant to conclude that he was good. But there was something in him that was honest in a way that most people in this building, with their titles and their credentials and their careful performance of ethics, were not. He was honest about what he was, and he had used what he was in the only direction that, in this particular moment, made any sense. She picked up her notepad from where she had been holding it against her side throughout the entire conversation. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I should get back," she said. "Yes," he said. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused, not for dramatic effect, but because something occurred to her that she needed to say while she was still in the room to say it. "Her name," she said. Sung-Yun. She didn't turn around entirely, just enough. "It's a beautiful name." She heard nothing behind her, but she felt, in the particular way you feel things that are not sounds, that something in the room changed. That something was exhaled that had been held for a very long time. She walked back down the corridor. The marble was cool and white, and even under her shoes. The city hummed its permanent hum beyond the glass walls on either side. She did not know yet what would happen to Derek. She did not know what the version history the IT team had pulled would mean in concrete terms. She did not know what it meant exactly to have been seen by a man like Kwon Sung-jin, or what that visibility would cost her, or whether it would cost her anything at all. She knew that the crescent moon was still warm at her collarbone. She knew that her mother had placed it there on a morning full of possibility and told her, "You were made for rooms that don't yet know they need you." She had not believed it completely. Not yet. Not until about 40 minutes ago. She sat back down at her desk, opened the dark green notepad, and for the first time in 23 days, she wrote something that was not a date, or a task, or a reminder. She wrote, "I was here, and I did not disappear." The email arrived at 4:57 in the afternoon. Naomi saw it the way you see things that arrive at the periphery of your attention while your hands are doing something else. She was reorganizing the shared drive folders she had been assigned to audit, a task that required enough concentration to occupy the surface of her mind while leaving the underneath free to process the afternoon, which had been, by any reasonable measure, too large to process quickly. She was letting it settle in layers. The conference room, the corridor, the office. The name Sung-yeon said quietly into a room 34 floors above a city that would never know it had been said. The email was from Human Resources. The subject line read, "Employment Status Update, Derek Calloway." She did not open it immediately. She sat with the subject line for a moment the way you sit with a sentence that is doing more than one thing at once. Then she opened it. It was 3 sentences, corporate in structure, precise in language, information-dense in the way that HR communications are always information-dense because they are written by people whose job is to say exactly what must be said and nothing that doesn't have to be. Derek Calloway's employment with Sun Capital Group had been terminated effective that afternoon. All projects under his management were being reassigned pending a departmental review. Team members with questions were invited to contact HR directly. She read it twice. Then she closed it. She had expected, she realized, to feel something larger. Some version of the satisfaction that lives at the end of stories about justice. The clean resolution that arrives when the correct person receives the correct consequence, and the universe demonstrates, briefly, that it is paying attention. She had expected the weight she had been carrying to release all at once, like a held breath. What she felt instead was quieter, more specific. It was not satisfaction, exactly, and it was not relief, exactly. It was something closer to the feeling of putting down a bag you have been carrying for so long that you had forgotten you were carrying it. Not the absence of weight, which is exhilarating, but the moment just before, when your hands have released the handle and the weight is still transferring and your shoulders are just beginning to understand that they are allowed to drop. She closed her laptop at 5:14. She gathered her things with the same unhurried precision with which she did everything. The dark green notepad went into the tote bag. The pen went into the small pocket on the outside. She stood up, straightened the beige blazer once, and looked at the desk for a moment. At the clean surface of it, the small cactus she had placed in the corner on her 3rd day, because she had read that plants improved cognitive function, and also because she had wanted one thing in this space that was entirely hers. She picked up the tote bag. She touched the crescent moon once. She walked to the elevator. The lobby was its usual evening self. The particular controlled rush of a building emptying itself of the day. People moving through the revolving doors with the slightly loosened energy of individuals whose professional faces were already beginning to come off. Naomi moved through them without being moved by them, which was her particular skill, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Manhattan in the early evening of a Tuesday in the not quite end of the work week had a specific quality of light. The kind that comes in low and sideways and turns ordinary surfaces briefly golden before the city's own illumination takes over and renders it irrelevant. The buildings caught it. The windows threw it back in pieces. The street held it for a moment in the puddles left by the afternoon's brief rain, and then a cab moved through one of the puddles and dispersed it, and the light was just light again. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside the building. She was not smiling yet. She was doing the thing she did before she allowed herself to feel something completely. Holding it at the threshold, turning it over, making sure it was real before she let it in. 22 years old, and she had already learned to do this, which said something about the world she had been given to navigate. Which said something about the number of times she had reached for something that turned out not to be there. This was there. She put her earbuds in. She pressed play. The piano came in first. Always the piano. Always first. Which was why she loved jazz the way she loved it. Because it had the courtesy to arrive before everything else and prepare the way. Then the bass. Then underneath both of them, the brush against the snare that felt like breathing. She started walking. She walked 4 blocks before she smiled. Not because she was waiting for the right moment, but because that was how long it took for her body to finish believing it was allowed to. The smile came up from somewhere below her sternum, and it arrived on her face without being placed there, and it was entirely, completely, and only for herself. Across the city, in a car moving uptown through traffic that would have frustrated anyone who had not long ago made peace with the fact that Manhattan does not accommodate urgency on its own schedule, Kwon Sung-jin sat in the back seat with his phone face down on the leather beside him and his eyes on the city moving past the window. He had been in this car for 11 minutes. He had not made a call. He had not checked his messages. He had not done any of the things he normally did in the car, which were the things that the car was functionally for. The sealed, mobile continuation of the day's work that allowed him to extract productivity from the gaps between other productivity. He was thinking about a morning in Seoul 11 years ago. He was thinking about a phone call he had taken on a rooftop. He had been on a rooftop, he remembered that. He had stepped outside to take the call because the room he was in was too loud. And the voice on the other end of that call, and the way the city below him had continued to exist and move and be entirely indifferent to the thing the voice was telling him. He thought about this morning with the specific, involuntary quality of thoughts that have not been thought in a long time. You forget, over years, that you are not thinking about something. You mistake the silence around a subject for having processed it. And then something cracks the silence open. Not with violence, but with something much harder to defend against, which is recognition. And the silence turns out to have been a structure, and the structure turns out to have been temporary. A girl with a dark green notepad and a gold crescent moon at her throat had walked out of a side corridor with her shoulders level and her chin up, and her grip on the notepad slightly too tight. And he had recognized her before he knew anything about her. Not her name, not her story. He had recognized the thing she was carrying, and the specific dignity with which she was carrying it. Sun-yun had carried things the same way. Right until the end, she had carried things that way. Shoulders level, chin up, grip too tight. He had not protected her. He had been in a different city, building a different world, and he had taken her Sunday phone calls and believed she was fine. And he had not paid the kind of attention that would have shown him she was not. And then one Thursday morning on a rooftop in Seoul, the call came that was not from her, but about her. And the city below continued to exist. And he had stood on that rooftop for a very long time without moving. 11 years. Enough time to build an empire. Enough time to make certain that no version of that Thursday morning was ever something he would have to stand inside again. which he had done by becoming someone it would not occur to the world to test in that particular way. Enough time for the grief to transform into something harder and more permanent and more useful. Not enough time, it turned out, to fully finish thinking about the way she walked. He picked his phone up, put it back down, looked at the city. He had done one thing today that had nothing to do with strategy or leverage or the protection of interests. He had done one thing today that Sung-Yun would have recognized if she had been there to see it. He did not know what to call it. He did not particularly need to call it anything. He knew only that a 22-year-old woman was somewhere in this city tonight, carrying less than she had been carrying this morning, and that the man who had made her carry it was no longer in a position to do so. And that these two facts together produced something in his chest that was not peace exactly, because peace implied an arrival, and he did not think he was going to arrive anywhere. But that was calmer than the thing that had been there before. The car moved uptown. The city arranged itself in its evening configuration. Lights coming on in towers, the particular illumination of a place that never fully darkens. He watched it move past the window, and he did not look away. And for a few minutes, he simply let himself be a person sitting in a car, looking at a city, which was not a thing he allowed himself to be very often. His phone buzzed once. He looked at it. His assistant confirming the details of tomorrow's 6 a.m. call with the Tokyo office. He replied, "Confirmed." Then he put the phone face down again and went back to the window. Naomi did not learn the full contents of what happened in the executive floor that afternoon until 3 days later, when a colleague, one of the junior analysts, a young woman named Priya who had sat 3 seats down from her in the conference room and had been, Naomi noted, one of the few people who had not studied her hands during Derek's presentation, told her over coffee in the building's ground floor cafe. The IT team had pulled the version history within 40 minutes of the conference room meeting ending. The original files, sent by Derek to Naomi at 9:47 p.m. the previous night, had been timestamped, logged, and compared against the final presentation. Every slide she had rebuilt was documented, every data correction traced to its source. The analysis, which Derek had presented as his own with 11 hours of sleep between request and delivery, was reconstructed in the record as having been produced between 9:47 p.m. and 12:43 a.m. by a user account that was not Derek Calloway's. The formal review had taken less time than reviews of this kind usually take, which was, Priya said, its own kind of message. Naomi listened to all of this with the coffee cup warm between both hands and her expression even and attentive. When Priya finished, she nodded. "Did you know?" Priya asked. "That he was in the corridor?" "No," Naomi said. "I didn't." Priya looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a previous assumption. "How are you doing with all of it?" Naomi thought about this honestly, which was the only way she thought about things. "I'm okay," she said. "I think I've been okay for a few days." She meant it. She meant it in the complete, non-performative way that okay sometimes means. Not the absence of complexity, not the resolution of everything, but the discovery that you are still standing after something that tried to make you feel small. And that standing feels, today, like enough. That evening, walking to the subway, with the city doing its Tuesday evening thing around her, she called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, the way she had always done, as though she kept the phone close in the particular manner of someone who understood that their child moved through a world that occasionally required backup. "How was work?" her mother asked. Naomi considered the question. She considered the conference room and the silence and the dragon tattoo above an open collar and a name said quietly into a room above Manhattan. She considered a woman named Sung-Yun, who had been 21 and good at her job, and who had carried things with her shoulders level and her chin up until she couldn't anymore. She considered the crescent moon at her own throat, warm from her skin. "It was a lot," she said. "I'll tell you everything on Sunday." "You sound different," her mother said. "I feel different." "Different good?" Naomi came up out of the subway stairs into the evening air. The light was doing the low, sideways thing again, catching the windows and throwing pieces of gold across the pavement, and she stood in it for a moment before descending into the station. "Yeah," she said. "Different good." She took the stairs down into the station. The train came quickly, the way trains sometimes do when you are not in a hurry and therefore notice them arriving, rather than waiting for them with the specific tension of lateness. She found a seat. She put her earbuds in. The piano came in first. Always first. She opened the dark green notepad to the last page she had written on. The sentence she had written at 4:53 that afternoon, before the email had arrived, and before she had gone home, and before any of it had finished settling. "I was here, and I did not disappear." She read it once. Then she uncapped her pen, and beneath it, in the same careful handwriting, she wrote one more line. "And tomorrow, I'll still be here." She capped the pen. She closed the notepad. She let the jazz fill the space between her ears. And the city moved past the windows of the train, and she looked at it without looking away. And the crescent moon sat warm and still at her collarbone. And she let herself, finally and completely, be a person who had gotten through a hard day and come out the other side of it with something she had not had before. Not just credit. Not just documentation in a version history that would now carry her name. Something quieter than that. Something she would not have had clean language for if someone had asked her to name it, but that lived in the specific way her shoulders had dropped somewhere between the 34th floor and the sidewalk. That lived in the 4 blocks it had taken her body to believe the smile was allowed. The train moved south. The city arranged itself around her, and she was in it, not invisible, not provisional, not performing the absence of herself for the comfort of rooms that had not yet learned to hold her. She was in it. She was present. She was real. And she was staying. If this story moved something in you, stop for just a moment and ask yourself this. Have you ever been in that conference room, not as the one who spoke up, but as one of the 12 who said nothing? Have you ever watched someone absorb a wound that wasn't theirs to carry and looked away because it was easier? And if someone had seen you, really seen you, the way Sung-jin saw Naomi in that corridor, in your hardest and most invisible moment, would you have let yourself be helped? Or would you have said, "I'm fine standing, thank you"? Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the redemption we find in unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe to the channel